My name is Harper Lane, and for years, my parents laughed in my face every time I talked about running an online business. They called it a Wi-Fi game, a temporary hobby before you grow up for real. Meanwhile, my younger sister, the so-called golden daughter, was showered with praise, framed diplomas, and a lavish graduation party. Me? I was handed an event staff t-shirt and told to direct cars in the parking lot. But everything changed when that so-called Wi-Fi game turned into a $5 million business, and the people who once mocked me had to learn the art of silence. This story isn't just about success. It's about reclaiming your worth, about realizing that you no longer need validation from those who once dismissed you. What about you? Have you ever been judged just because you didn't follow the right path? Let me know where you're watching this story from. One thing I've learned from my family is this: they'll support you as long as your success looks exactly like what they picture in their textbooks. I grew up in a 2-story colonial home on the west side of Austin, where my father, Dr. Gregory Lane, was seen as the embodiment of achievement, a neurosurgeon always in crisp white shirts, speaking to patients in a deep, authoritative tone. My mother, Margaret Lane, a literature professor at the University of Texas, believed that every proper life path must go through a lecture hall, then a framed honors degree, and finally a glowing office downtown. They met on campus 30 years ago, married before beginning their academic careers, and to this day, they tell that story as proof that knowledge is the foundation of everything. I was born into that foundation, and eventually, I became the one who broke it. From a young age, I was different. While other kids dreamed of becoming doctors, engineers, or lawyers, I loved cutting paper, stitching little fabric bags, and selling tiny handmade crafts at the weekend market. I can still remember the look in my mother's eyes whenever she saw me in the garage, paint-stained hands, smiling because I'd just sold my first item to a tourist. "Harper," she'd sigh, "you can do so much more than this. You're smart, don't waste your time on something so fleeting." I never argued. I just nodded. Because when you're the only daughter in a family where your father's a surgeon and your mother's a professor, rebellion isn't exactly an easy choice. In my family, everything had an order, even success. My father's office walls were covered with certificates, diplomas, and framed photos of him shaking hands with colleagues at medical conferences. My mother had entire shelves lined with academic journals bearing her name on dozens of published papers. And me, I had sketches of product designs, rolls of canvas, and jars of recycled wax. That, to them, was my imaginary career. When I applied to a business school in Dallas, they both sighed in relief. "Finally, you're growing up," my father said, placing a proud hand on my shoulder. But just a year later, I dropped out. I'd realized I didn't want to spend my life in a company where every meeting ended with lifeless charts and color-coded slides. I wanted to make something small, maybe, but something that carried a soul. I started in the tiny garage behind our house, the one where my father used to park his sports car and my mother stored boxes of old books and forgotten decor. One summer morning, I swept away the dust, rearranged a table, added a few wooden shelves, and turned it into the first workshop for EcoNest. The air smelled of beeswax, raw fabric, and acrylic paint, a scent far richer than any expensive perfume. I did everything by hand: melting wax, pouring molds, cutting fabric, sewing each tote bag, and photographing products with my old phone. In the mornings, I packed orders. At night, I taught myself how to run online ads. There were no days off. No weekends. Sometimes I thought, if someone filmed me sitting there at 2 a.m., tying candle strings with wax-stained fingers, they'd probably think I'd lost my mind. But I knew exactly what I was building: something real. My father called it the postage stamp job. One evening, after I'd just finished packing my 100th order and rolled the boxes down to the delivery truck, he looked at me through the living room window and let out a small, amused laugh. "Harper," he said, "how long are you going to keep playing this online selling game? When will you get a real job?" I stood there, sweat dripping down my wrist, the boxes around me faintly scented with lavender from the candles inside. I wanted to tell him that I was already making over $2,000 a month, that I was paying for my own rent and insurance entirely on my own. But I knew that saying so would only invite more contempt. So, I stayed silent. My mother didn't defend me either. She simply said, "Greg, let it be. She's just finding her own path." It sounded kind on the surface, but beneath it was the same polite way of saying I was still not grown up yet. In every way, my sister Lila was my opposite, the shining child my parents proudly called America's pride. She was 5 years younger than me, brilliant, beautiful, lively, accepted into Stanford, later interning at the United Nations. From the moment she was born, it felt like every beam of light in our home had turned toward her. My parents threw parties when she earned scholarships. They posted her photos on Facebook whenever she gave a speech at a student conference. And me? Every time I mentioned expanding EcoNest, my mother would simply change the subject. "Have you heard from Lila? She just got invited to write for her university magazine." At first, I kept trying. I thought if I worked hard enough, if I stayed patient, one day they'd be proud of me too. But eventually, I realized they didn't want to understand me, they just wanted me to resemble them. Dinner at our house always felt like a press conference about Lila. Every time I came home, I felt like an uninvited guest at someone else's celebration. Mom would beam and ask, "Lila, wasn't your essay selected for the university journal last week?" Dad would nod proudly. "We're so proud of you, sweetheart. Even my residents at the hospital aren't as sharp as you." Then the two of them would drift into a full conversation about Stanford, about which professor had written her recommendation letter, and about her summer internship in New York. I sat there quietly, eating mashed potatoes, thinking about the order I had shipped that morning to a customer in Oregon who'd emailed me saying my candle made her small apartment smell like childhood again. But I said nothing. At that dinner table, it was as if nothing about me existed. Once, I tried. I said softly, "EcoNest made $2,000 this month. I'm planning to hire someone to help with packaging." My father looked up, raised an eyebrow, and laughed. "2,000? That's pocket change, Harper. Have you even thought about health insurance? Retirement? Your future? You need a real career, not some online hobby." Then, my mother gave a faint, polite smile as she sliced her chicken and changed the subject again. "Lila, did you hear Dr. Sullivan is looking for a research assistant? You should apply." I sat there, and suddenly the food in my mouth felt impossible to swallow. Not because of what they said, but because I realized something deeper. They never wanted to hear me at all. After that dinner, I moved out. I rented a small apartment in the South Lamar district, a worn-out attic with a window overlooking the Colorado River. It was barely big enough for a desk, a shelf of supplies, and a single mattress on the floor. But for the first time in my life, I felt free. I worked day and night, learning how to streamline production, applying for a business license, opening an LLC account, and slowly, the revenue began to grow. There were nights when I packed orders while hearing church bells ring faintly across the river, and my heart felt weightless. I had no one cheering me on, but I didn't need anyone to. Still, I kept the habit of sending cards and gifts to my parents on holidays. Every Christmas, I hand-poured a candle and carved the words, "Family First," into it before mailing it to their house. They never once said thank you. Sometimes my mother would send a short text. "Thanks, sweetheart, it's pretty." That was it. I didn't resent them. They were simply living in their own world, a world where success had a single, acceptable form: offices, business cards, colleagues in suits, and back-to-back meetings. I was different. And, in their eyes, different meant wrong. One weekend, I decided to visit. When I stepped into the living room, my mother was showing her friend a photo of Lila taken in Washington, D.C. blue blazer, standing proudly in front of the Capitol building. "She was born for success," Mom said, smiling. "She makes me proud every single day." Her friend asked, "And what about your older daughter? I heard she's doing something in art." My mother chuckled softly, lowering her voice. "Oh, Harper. She's just experimenting with a few little online projects. She's creative, but not very stable yet." I stood behind them and heard every word. I wasn't angry, just hollow. I had to admit, Lila was the jewel of our family, perhaps of the entire Lane lineage. She had that kind of presence that pulled every gaze in the room the second she walked in. At 24, she embodied everything my parents had ever dreamed of for a daughter. A master's degree in international relations from DC, glowing recommendations from renowned professors, and that soft yet confident grace of someone who is born to be admired. Whenever my mother spoke of Lila, her tone carried the same reverence she used in her lectures when quoting great writers. "She has the aura of someone who's going to change the world." I remember the exact moment I realized my place in that silent family hierarchy. That day, Lila had just received a full scholarship to Stanford. My parents threw a huge celebration cake, candles, flowers, even a professional photographer to capture the moment. When I landed my first $5,000 contract for EcoNest, I sent a message in the family group chat to share the good news. The only responses I got were a thumbs-up emoji from my dad and a short text from my mom. "Good, keep it up." A few minutes later, the chat was flooded with photos of Lila trying on her graduation gown, captioned, "Number proud mom. Number future leader." Lila always had parties. When she was accepted into the United Nations internship program, they rented an upscale restaurant in downtown Austin to celebrate their daughter's big step forward. When her paper got published in an academic journal, my parents printed it out, taped it to the refrigerator, and posted a photo of it online. "One more day, one more reason to be proud," the caption read, surrounded by dozens of congratulatory comments from friends, colleagues, and relatives. And me? I never had a party. No cake, no banner, no hashtag, except maybe a few thank you emails from strangers who bought my candles. In our extended family group chat, nearly 20 members, the cover photo had always been Lila standing on stage at the International Student Conference, speaking confidently into a microphone. Whenever someone sent a congratulatory message, my mom would react with a big red heart. One time, my aunt jokingly shared a photo of me at a local market standing behind my EcoNest booth, wearing an apron, smiling beside rows of candles. Someone edited the image and added the caption, "Our hardworking Etsy girl," followed by a laughing emoji. No one objected. No one deleted it. My father even commented, "At least she's keeping the entrepreneurial spirit alive." They laughed. I laughed too. But inside, it felt cold, like I'd just been cast as the comic relief in my own family's story. I told myself I wasn't jealous. At least, I wanted to believe that. Lila had never been cruel to me, not directly. She just never saw me. Whenever we met, she'd give me a polite hug and say in that gentle yet distant tone, "Still doing those crafts, huh? That's cute. But you know, people outsource everything to factories in Mexico now. Maybe you should think bigger." I just smiled. Some battles aren't won with words, they're won with proof. So I stayed silent and let my results speak for me. 3 years after I left home, EcoNest had grown beyond anything I had ever dared to imagine. I had a team of 8 employees, an online store pulling in 6-figure revenue, and a contract under negotiation with a major supermarket chain in California. Still, I didn't brag. I believed real success didn't need noise. But somehow, my silence only convinced them I had nothing worth saying. Meanwhile, Lila returned from DC with her master's degree, and my family began preparing what they called the event of the century. The invitation arrived in a thick, gold-embossed envelope, so elegant it almost made me laugh. At the top, in perfect serif font, were the words, "Formal attire only. No +1. Just one line. Cold, precise. No guests, no partners, no family attachments. Only me to show up and witness." When I read that, I actually chuckled. It was as if they were afraid I might bring someone who could tarnish the Lane family image. I set the invitation down on my desk and looked around my apartment, the place I had built from scratch, every inch paid for by my own hands, my own work. For a moment, I thought about throwing the envelope straight into the trash. But then I remembered what Tessa, my best friend, once told me, the one who had seen me through every bruise my family had left. When I told her about the invitation, she shrugged and said, "Sometimes silence is exactly what they want from you. If you don't go, they'll call it jealousy. But if you do go, they'll have to see you. In person. Not as the story they've rewritten about you at their dinner table." Her words stayed with me the entire night. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I would go. Not to prove anything, but to stop running from the ghost of who they thought I was. I chose a simple slate blue dress, elegant, understated, perfectly fitted. I didn't want to stand out, I just wanted to arrive. Not as the daughter who was still finding her path. Not as the Etsy girl with a cute little business. Just as Harper, the woman they had long forgotten I'd become. That day, the sky over Austin was impossibly clear, the kind of blue that almost felt rehearsed. I drove my old electric car to my parents' house half an hour earlier than the time on the invitation, partly to avoid the crowd of relatives, partly to gather my composure before the celebration began. When I parked by the gate, I froze. The backyard had been transformed into a grand outdoor stage. Golden string lights crisscrossed above rows of neatly aligned chairs, a bold "Congratulations, Lila" banners stretched across the white brick wall, and everything shimmered like a scene from a movie, one in which I no longer had a role. I was about to step into the reception area when a cheerful voice called out behind me. "Harper, you made it, finally." I turned around to see Aunt Julie, my mother's older sister, holding a clipboard and a walkie-talkie. She wore a crisp white blouse and khaki pants, looking every bit like an event coordinator. Beaming, she hurried toward me and suddenly pressed a plastic name badge into my hands. Bold letters glared back at me. "Event Logistics, Staff." I blinked. "Aunt Julie, what is this?" She patted my shoulder affectionately. "Oh, sweetie, we just need an extra pair of hands to rearrange the chairs and help direct the parking. You've got all that online business experience, right? I bet you're great at organizing. Go on, put it on." Before I could say anything, she had already walked away, speaking into her walkie-talkie. "Got another helper, Harper Lane, my niece." I stood there, motionless for a few seconds, staring at the badge in my hand as my heart sank. The word staff gleamed mockingly under the sunlight like a cruel little joke that everyone but me was in on. I wanted to say it, to tell them I was here as a guest, as the sister of the woman they were celebrating. But then I heard my mother's voice behind me, soft but edged with that familiar undertone of expectation. "Just help out a bit, Harper. Everyone's busy. You know how important it is for everything to be perfect for Lila today." I turned to look at her. She smiled, calm and unbothered, not a flicker of embarrassment in her eyes. As if being mistaken for event staff was the most natural thing in the world for me. So I said nothing. Maybe because silence had always been the safest response in my family. I pinned the badge to my dress and walked toward the parking area. For the next hour, I directed guests, rearranged chairs, even helped Aunt Julie's father find a seat near the fan. No one thanked me. They just nodded politely, then moved on to take photos with Lila. My heels were soon coated with dust. The hem of my slate blue dress caught on the metal chairs. When I finally looked up, the sun had slipped past the roofline and music began to swell through the speakers. The party, Lila's party, had officially begun. No one told me I could stop. Eventually, I took off the badge, set it down on the catering table, and found myself a seat in the farthest corner near the buffet. It was a side table, the kind staff used to rest trays of drinks. No one even noticed I was there. Lila, glowing in a pure white dress, stood at the center of the stage, surrounded by relatives and local reporters. My father was beside her, greeting guests with a broad smile, while my mother fussed over Lila's hair, adjusting every strand as though she were prepping a movie star. I watched the scene quietly, my chest tightening not with jealousy, but with a strange, sinking clarity. In their eyes, My worth only existed when I was working for someone else, even here, at a celebration supposedly belonging to our family. When a waiter passed by, I poured myself a glass of white wine. Laughter and chatter filled the air, blending into a hum of perfection. But, to me, the sound came from somewhere distant, muffled like hearing life through a wall. I bit my lip, trying to hold a polite smile, but the ache inside pulsed deeper with every cheer. I wanted to leave. But I couldn't. A small, stubborn part of me wanted to see just how far their blindness could go. At 7 o'clock sharp, the music faded. The host stepped onto the stage, his voice rich with theatrics. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight we celebrate the young woman who has made Austin proud, a woman of intellect, heart, and the ambition to change the world, Lila Lane. Applause erupted. I saw my parents rise to their feet, clapping harder than anyone else. Lila walked onto the stage through the thunder of cheers, her brown hair gleaming under the lights, her white gown rippling elegantly with every step. She radiated the kind of confidence that comes from being adored for too long. Taking the microphone, she smiled at the crowd. Thank you, everyone, for being here tonight. And thank you to my parents for teaching me that true effort always finds its reward. The applause swelled again. Then she paused, scanning the audience as if to ensure every eye was on her. When she spoke again, her tone dropped playful, but with a sharp undertone of intent. In today's world, she said, it's so easy to get distracted by what looks like success, things like Wi-Fi or a few clicks online. The crowd laughed. She gave a soft, knowing smile. But real success, she continued, doesn't come from that. It comes from learning, from real work, from real knowledge. Oko. The moment her sentence ended, the crowd erupted in laughter. It rolled through the yard like a wave, loud and gleeful, followed by a few whistles and claps of agreement. The air around me seemed to thicken, as though all those soft golden lights had suddenly turned into harsh white beams aimed directly at my face. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the stage, yet somehow, the live stream camera swung toward my corner. And there I was, projected onto the small LED screen beside the stage, sitting alone in the shadows, holding a half-finished glass of wine. My eyes met my mother's across the yard. She saw me, I knew she did. But instead of reacting, she just gave a small shrug, light and effortless, as if to say, don't make a scene. A tiny gesture, but it hit like a cold slap. I wasn't angry because I'd been humiliated. I was angry because, to them, humiliation had become normal. The laughter continued, echoing under the string lights. A relative at the table next to mine leaned toward his friend and said, just loud enough for me to hear, she's right though. These days, everyone thinks selling stuff online counts as a job. The other nodded, snickering. I set my glass down carefully, forcing my hands to stay still. For a moment, I wondered what I was even doing there. I had once believed that if I just worked hard enough, if my results were real enough, they'd eventually see me. But, in that instant, I understood that day would never come. Lila kept speaking about her passion to contribute to the global community, about the responsibility of the younger generation, and her gratitude for her family's unwavering support. Each pause was met with another round of applause, a cheer of bravo or, that's my girl. How was... My father smiled, radiant with pride. My mother dabbed at her tears with a tissue. I sat there, hollow. It felt like watching a play I'd once starred in, only now someone else had taken my role, and I was just another face in the audience. As the applause began to fade, Lila raised her champagne glass high. Thank you all for believing in me, she said, her voice clear and deliberate. And thank you, Mom and Dad, for teaching me that true success doesn't come from Wi-Fi or a few clicks online but from real effort. This time, she said it slower. Sharper. Her gaze swept across the audience, and then stopped. Right on me. Laughter erupted again, louder this time, sharper, carried by the storm of applause that followed my little sister's final jab. I'm not sure if, in that moment, I laughed or cried. All I remember is the way my fingers clenched around the stem of my glass until my knuckles turned white. And how the music that returned after her speech sounded like a funeral drum, as if something inside me was being laid to rest. When the crowd began to disperse, my mother came over. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder and spoke softly, just for me to hear. "Don't be upset," she said. She didn't mean anything by it, it was just a joke. Not. I looked up at her, the same fixed smile frozen on my face, and whispered, "I know, it's always just a joke." I lifted my glass, watching the golden lights shimmer in the pale wine, each ripple glinting like coagulated blood. Something inside me cracked, not in pain, but in realization. I had reached the outer edge of my endurance. There was no room left for hope. No illusion that being better, kinder, or more patient would ever make them love me more. Under that glittering canopy of warm lights, I sat perfectly still, almost invisible, and one sentence kept echoing in my head. "I'm not angry because they humiliated me, I'm angry because they think it's normal." The party dragged on until nearly 9. The string lights dimmed, the music shifted from acoustic pop to soft jazz. Guests drifted away from the stage toward the bar and the photo booth, while Lila still stood glowing like a movie star at her premiere. People lined up to shake her hand, to praise her, to ask about her next step. I remained at the last table, my wine now flat and warm, the candle flickering weakly in the night breeze. No one came near me. No one noticed I was still there. I was about to leave. I thought maybe I should just slip out quietly, the way I always did, let them keep their perfect little story about the daughter still finding her path. But then I saw Lila's radiant smile flash under the camera lights, my parents clapping proudly beside her, the crowd surrounding them in admiration, and something stirred inside me. It was strange. Warm and cold all at once. And, most of all, final. Enough. I stood up. No one noticed. I walked slowly between the rows of chairs, the scent of champagne mixing with lilies and damp grass after the rain, thickening the air around me. A few guests turned their heads as I passed, probably assuming I was part of the cleanup crew. I gave them a small smile and kept walking until I stopped in front of Lila. "Lila," I said calmly. "Congratulations. It must be wonderful to have a family that believes in you, that always supports you." The chatter around us faded, one voice after another going quiet until the whole yard felt suspended in stillness. Lila hesitated. Her smile stayed, but her eyes flickered. "Thank you," she said, her tone unsure now. I nodded lightly. My voice was soft, almost gentle. And as for me, the one who was told she was still finding her path, I just wanted to say, yesterday, Econest signed a $5 million distribution deal with Target. I paused, the weight of my words landing like a whisper. "Thank you for teaching me patience." The air froze. The music cut off, though no one had touched the speakers. Somewhere behind me, a glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered. I heard a few sharp intakes of breath. A guest glanced uncertainly at my father, who stood motionless, mouth slightly open, unable to form a sound. My mother, the woman who always knew how to smile her way through any social situation, was pale, gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles turned white. I raised my glass and tapped it lightly against the air. "Cheers, Lila. Cheers to the whole family. And cheers to everything truly wonderful that you deserve." Then I turned and walked away. I didn't need a mic drop. I didn't need a dramatic exit line. The silence that followed, absolute, stunned, reverent, was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. I stepped off the lawn, my heels sinking slightly into the damp ground. Behind me, there was no music anymore, no laughter, only scattered whispers carried by the wind. What did she just say? $5 million? What's Econest? I didn't turn around. I'd heard enough to know the story would spread faster than any of their carefully curated posts ever could. When I reached the gravel path, the backyard lights reflected off my car, parked where it had been since the afternoon. I caught a faint glimpse of myself in the window, blurred by the glare, half shadow, half light. Part of me still couldn't believe I had actually done it, that, after years of quiet endurance, I had finally said something that flipped the entire narrative in a matter of seconds. Not for revenge. For release. I drove slowly. In the rearview mirror, the house still blazed with light, but it looked different now, tired, hollow, almost lost. The Austin night stretched ahead of me, calm and clear, so still I could hear the rhythm of my own heartbeat. I turned on the radio. An old Fleetwood Mac song filled the car. I smiled not bitterly, just softly, the kind of smile that comes when the weight finally lifts. Later that night, as soon as I got home, my phone began to light up nonstop. The first message was from my mother. "You embarrassed this family. You ruined Lila's day." "No." "Did you get home safe?" "No." "Are you okay?" Just another command, cold, clipped, predictable. Then came one from Aunt Julie. "You should apologize. Everyone knows Lila was just joking. You went too far." I read every message and replied to none. Some conversations aren't conversations at all, they're verdicts, already decided before you even open your mouth. So I turned the phone off, placed it face down on the table, and let silence do what it does best. Heal, by emptying everything out. I fell asleep dreamlessly. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, and I opened my laptop to check orders only to freeze. My inbox was overflowing. Over 40 new emails overnight, mostly from local news outlets and startup blogs. EcoNest, local brand lands, multi-million-dollar deal with Target. Founder humiliated at graduation party turns tables in viral moment. Someone at the party had recorded me just that 7-second clip where I said, EcoNest just signed a $5 million contract with Target. They'd posted it on TikTok. By morning, it had exploded. The comments flooded in. Queen energy. Bet the family that laughed at her is hiding under a table right now. This isn't revenge, this is karma finally arriving on time. I didn't know whether to laugh or to sigh. Everything happened so fast. By noon the next day, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters, investors, partners, old acquaintances. A business magazine editor from Dallas asked for an exclusive interview. A week later, Target officially sent the contract and invited me to their Minneapolis headquarters to sign it in person. That day, I wore my old beige blazer, the same one my mother once mocked as cheap, like something a grocery store clerk would wear. And under the gleaming logo of one of America's largest retail corporations, I signed my name. As I was leaving the conference room, the Target representative shook my hand. "Harper," he said, "we're genuinely impressed. You built everything from scratch, no investors, no startup capital, just belief and smart strategy." I smiled. "Thank you. I guess sometimes, being underestimated can be a competitive advantage." He laughed. "I'll remember that." 2 weeks later, I returned to Austin and rented a small brick building on South Congress as EcoNest's new office. From a makeshift garage workshop, I now had a full workspace, product display area, design studio, and a 12-person full-time team. On opening day, I hung the wooden sign myself. EcoNest, sustainable design, born from the ground up. Staring at the letters, my eyes stung slightly, not out of pride, but out of memory. All those years of being laughed at for my craft hobby had somehow led here. About a month later, on a quiet Friday afternoon, I was showing a new employee how to streamline the production process when there was a knock at the door. I turned around, it was my mother. She stood there in a light jacket, holding a casserole dish. "I made lasagna," she said softly, her voice trembling slightly, as if afraid to break the fragile air between us. I nodded and gestured her inside. The office was bright and orderly now, filled with the faint scent of beeswax and pinewood. She looked around, her eyes lingering on the metal EcoNest logo mounted on the wall. "It's beautiful," she murmured, her tone distant, almost unfamiliar. "You did all this yourself?" I smiled. "Me and my team." She nodded, setting the lasagna on the table. "I just wanted to talk for a bit. Do you have time?" I pulled out a chair across from her and offered her a glass of water. She sat quietly for a long moment before finally speaking. "You went too far, Harper," she said. "The whole family was embarrassed. You didn't have to say those things in front of everyone. I just want you to be stable, to have a proper job, with benefits, with a future. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. I listened, then replied slowly. Stable for who, Mom? For other people or for myself? Her brows furrowed. Don't argue with me. When I say stable, it's because I care. Who wouldn't want their child to be safe? I met her eyes. Safe, even if it means being looked down on, laughed at, turned into the family's favorite cautionary tale at every dinner? If that's the kind of safety you want for me, then I don't need it. She said nothing. I continued, my voice calm, steady. You say I went too far, but did you notice how quiet you were when people belittled me when they laughed at me in front of everyone? I wasn't angry at Lila's joke, Mom. I was hurt because you didn't see anything wrong with it. Oh. Her hands tightened in her lap. You told me to be patient, I went on softly. To endure, and I did for 10 years. But patience taught me something you never did, that sometimes, the only way to be respected is to stop asking for permission. My mother lowered her head, her fingers interlaced tightly. I never meant to hurt you, she said in a small voice. I was just scared you might fail. I smiled and for the first time, my tone softened. I know. But Mom, your fear made you blind to the fact that I was living, that I was growing. And the greatest failure for a mother isn't when her child falls, it's when her child stands back up, and she doesn't even notice. The room fell silent for a long while. She didn't look at me again, just nodded faintly. I don't know what to say. I stood, gently sliding the lasagna dish toward her. Then eat with me, I said. She looked at me, eyes full of guilt, but also something lighter, like relief. All right. We ate quietly. No one mentioned Lila. No one mentioned the party. When she stood to leave, she paused by the door and turned back. I don't think I understand everything you're doing, she said. But I'll try. I smiled softly. That's all I ever wanted. When the door closed behind her, I leaned back in my chair. What I felt wasn't victory, it was peace. The kind of peace that only comes when you finally stop needing to prove yourself to anyone. About a week after seeing my mother, I thought everything had finally settled. EcoNest was running smoothly, our design team had just launched a new collection, and the media was still buzzing about the businesswoman who was mocked at a family party. For the first time, I felt like I had truly stepped out of the old orbit until my phone rang. The name on the screen made me freeze. Dad. It had been a long time since he'd called directly. Usually, Mom would be the one to start the conversation with the familiar line. Your father wants to ask you something. I hesitated for a few seconds, then picked up. His voice was calm, deep, the same tone he used with patience, but underneath it was something strained, almost hesitant. Harper, he began. I won't keep you long. It's just that, your mother and I are in a bit of a financial bind. Some of the medical investments from last year haven't paid out yet, and, well, Lila's run into some trouble. I said nothing. He continued, slowly, carefully. You know how hard times are right now. We hate to ask, but if you could help us cover things for a few months just temporarily, it would really help us maintain good standing with the bank. After all, you're doing quite well these days, aren't you? I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The words, maintain good standing, landed like a blade, a sharp reminder that no matter how much I'd changed, to him, I was still just the safety net, the family's insurance policy for appearances. Can I ask, I said evenly, what kind of trouble Lila's in? My father cleared his throat, dodging. Oh, it's nothing serious. Just her new car, the lease is a bit above her means, and she hasn't found a stable position in DC yet. We've been helping her for a few months, but now, well, you understand. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. So, let me get this straight, you bought her a new car while she doesn't even have a job, and now you want me to cover the payments. He went silent. I could hear him exhale softly on the other end. Don't say it like that, Harper. She's your sister. We're family. Families help each other. And time. I looked around the bright, sunlit office of EcoNest, my team busy packing orders, laughing, moving with purpose and confidence. Then, my mind drifted back to when I was 22, still working double shifts at a coffee shop so I could send money home to help my parents fix the leaking roof that winter. I thought about all those years I paid my own rent, my own insurance, while they sent expensive gifts to Lila every holiday. Back then, I believed it was my duty and act of filial love. Now, all I felt was exhaustion. "Dad," I said quietly but firmly. "I'll send you something, then we can talk." I hung up, opened my laptop. On the screen was a file I'd created long ago, family contributions, .xlsx. Not out of resentment, but as a record, a quiet reminder of everything I'd done for them, hoping that someday they might notice. I scrolled to the bottom. 7 years of small, scattered entries. Hospital fees for Grandpa, birthday gifts for Lila, car repairs, plane tickets for Mom's trip to California. Even the forgotten ones, the $400 for Dad's lost phone, the $900 I wired when Lila missed a tuition payment. Total, $61,400. I stared at the number for a long while. Not with anger, but with a strange calm. Because the truth was there, in plain sight. And there was no room left for the illusion that I'd never helped. "Oh." I attached the file to a new email and typed, slowly and deliberately. Subject: about today's call. Dad, I've supported the family far beyond my means, not out of obligation, but out of love. Here's a record of those times, so no one forgets that I was always there, even when no one acknowledged it. I'm not bringing this up to collect anything. I just think it's time we all see things clearly. From now on, I'm stopping. I'm not angry. I just believe it's time I teach you and Lila a lesson this family has never learned: boundaries. I love you both. But I won't keep carrying the weight of choices that aren't mine. Harper. I hit send. The softing that followed was quiet, final, like the sound of a door closing for good. Right after that, I opened my banking app and locked every shared account I'd once created for emergencies. Grain. I canceled the recurring transfers that had quietly paid their house bills for years. For the first time in a long time, I cut the invisible cord that had tied me to guilt. That evening, I didn't wait for a response. I brewed myself a cup of peppermint tea and sat by the window, watching the city lights stretch across the skyline. Austin's summer night was calm, the only sound was the chorus of crickets rising from the courtyard below. My heartbeat slowed, steady and grounded, as if my body had finally put down a weight it had carried for years. Near midnight, my phone buzzed. A short message from my father. Got it. That was all. No thank you. No anger. No justification. I stared at those 2 words for a while, then deleted them. The next morning, I walked into the office. My team rushed over, faces lit up. Online orders had tripled overnight, and Target had just launched its promotional campaign for EcoNest. On the TV in the lounge, the company's logo appeared with the tagline, "Designed by women, built with heart." I smiled. Maybe that was the answer they'd always wanted from me, just not in the way they'd expected. That afternoon, another email arrived from my father. Just one line. "I understand, take care of yourself." I stared at the screen for a long moment, then closed the laptop. No tears. No anger. Just peace, the kind of peace I once thought was impossible in this relationship. That night, I pinned a small piece of paper to the wooden board in my office. On it, I wrote, "Boundaries aren't walls, they're doors. They only open when respect walks through." As the desk lamp reflected off those words, I knew. I had finally taught them, not through speeches, but through the way I lived. 2 weeks passed after that last message from my father, and I truly believed the story had ended. Life had settled into rhythm again. Every morning I'd stop by the office, sip my usual cappuccino, check sales reports, and brainstorm upcoming campaigns with the creative team. EcoNest was thriving more than ever. But deep down, I knew something still lingered, a silence between me and Lila. I wasn't angry anymore, and I didn't hate her. It was just as if we now lived on opposite sides of a river, unable to speak the same language. That Wednesday afternoon, as a light drizzle swept over the streets of Austin, my phone lit up. A message from Lila, just one line. "Harper, I'm sorry. Can we meet?" I stared at the screen for a long time, torn. My rational side told me to ignore it, but the human part, the softer part, couldn't. I didn't hate her, I just didn't believe she understood what she'd done. But then, somewhere inside, a quiet voice whispered, "If she's trying to make it right, at least give her the chance." I typed back, Oak, Elm Café, South Congress. 4 p.m. When I arrived, the cafe was a small, quiet place tucked between two boutique stores, its warm yellow light spilling through the fogged glass. Rain was falling steadily, turning the street outside into a mirror of shifting reflections. I chose a table by the window, ordered a latte, and tried to keep my mind still. At 4:10, the door opened. Lila walked in. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. Gone was the polished, confident woman from that night on stage. Standing before me now was someone with dark circles under her eyes, hair unbrushed and damp, her raincoat soaked through. "Harper." Her voice trembled. I simply nodded, motioning for her to sit. The server brought her a cappuccino, but she didn't touch it. She just stared at me for a long moment before the first tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm sorry," she said, voice breaking. I don't even know where to start. I messed up so badly." I stayed silent, letting her speak. She took a shaky breath and continued, her words spilling out between sobs. "After that night, I lost everything. The lease on my apartment got canceled because of credit card debt. The job in Washington fell through, and my student loan payments are due. I've been applying everywhere, but everyone wants experience, and I have none. I thought having a degree would make me strong, but all it's done is make me feel hollow. I was jealous of you, so jealous that I couldn't stand the idea that the sister everyone looked down on actually made something real." Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping against the windowpane in rhythm with her uneven breathing. I stayed still, hands folded together, saying nothing. A part of me wanted to whisper, "You had it coming." But a larger part, the one that remembered what it felt like to be dismissed, misunderstood, and crushed under the weight of someone else's expectations, only felt a quiet ache. "You know what the worst part is?" she said, voice hoarse. "Mom still tells me, don't let Harper think you need her." She looked down, tears sliding down her chin. I finally realized something sometimes, the pride they plant in us is what makes us weakest. I looked at her, really looked. And in her eyes, there was no trace of the confident girl who once stood on that stage basking in applause. There was only fatigue, the kind that comes when you've run out of versions of yourself to pretend to be. "You don't have to say anything else," I said quietly. "I understand." Lila shook her head. "No, there's something I need to do." She reached into her bag, pulled out her phone, and opened the camera app. I blinked, startled. "What are you doing?" She pressed her lips together. "I don't want this apology to stay between us. I humiliated you publicly. I need to apologize publicly." Before I could stop her, she hit record and turned the camera toward herself. Her voice trembled at first, but every word came out clear, deliberate. "Last week, I did something terrible. I humiliated the one person I should have been learning from, my sister. I used to believe that degrees and titles made me better than others. But sitting here today, I realize real success comes from courage and perseverance, not status. If anyone's watching this, please don't ever judge someone for the path they choose. My sister Harper built jobs for hundreds of people and created something that makes thousands of customers' lives better. And I, the one who laughed at her, only want to say one thing now. I'm sorry." She paused, took a long breath, then lifted her gaze straight into the camera, into me. "Thank you," she said softly, "for never turning silence into hate." Then she pressed stop, set the phone down, and looked at me through watery eyes. "I'm going to post it," she said. "Not to get my reputation back, but to remind myself never to forget today." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I didn't feel triumphant, just moved, deeply and quietly. I reached across the table and took her hand. "It's all right, Lila," I said. "I don't need you to restore my dignity. I just need to know you've learned." She laughed through her tears, an embarrassed, relieved little sound. "I've learned," she said. "A bit late, but I have." We stayed there a long time, talking about old things, the night we'd skipped class to watch fireworks by the lake, the time Mom caught me teaching her to make candles and grounded us both. Outside, the rain fell softly, the scent of coffee blending with the warm light from the hanging lamps. And for the first time in years, the space between us felt whole again. When Lila finally stood to leave, she turned and hugged me tightly, not the polite hug of adults, but the trembling, genuine embrace of a younger sister trying to find her way home. "I'll do better," she whispered. I smiled, nodding. "I know you will." When she stepped outside, the rain had stopped. I watched her small figure disappear into the gentle rhythm of the street, then turned back to the half-finished latte on the table. The milk foam had gone cold, but somehow, my heart felt warm. That evening, a notification popped up on my phone. "Lila Summers. New video. My apology." I opened it. Over 100,000 views in just 2 hours. The comments were overflowing, messages of compassion, encouragement, and even a few people realizing we were sisters. I stopped at one comment that read, "It's rare to see an apology this beautiful." I set the phone down, leaned my head back against the chair, and let out a slow, relieved breath. Outside, rain still whispered against the window pane. I smiled, not because I'd been vindicated, but because, finally, someone in my family had begun to understand. Respect isn't something you're given, it's something you learn. Lila's video spread faster than anyone could have imagined. Within 2 days, it was everywhere in Austin. Local news outlets shared it with headlines like, "From Envy to Empathy. The public apology that stunned a city." In the description, they mentioned me. Harper Lane, founder of EcoNest, the sustainable design brand that recently signed a $5 million deal with Target. But what moved me most wasn't the recognition or the numbers. It was how people spoke about Lila, not as a villain, not as someone defeated, but as a woman brave enough to face her mistakes. Social media filled with posts and reflections about forgiveness and family. Someone wrote, "Not every story gets a happy ending, but, sometimes, one apology is enough for 2 souls to find the same frequency again." Reading that, my throat tightened. The next afternoon, I was at the office when my phone rang. The screen read, "Mom." I hesitated before answering. On the other end, her voice trembled, fragile, as if holding back 1,000 things at once. "I saw it," she said. "Lila's video. I don't know what to say. I'm proud of you both, of both my daughters. Harper, I'm sorry. I was wrong. You deserve to be proud." I looked out the window. The late afternoon light spilled across my desk, glinting off the EcoNest logo like liquid gold. I smiled softly. "You don't have to apologize, Mom. Just listen. I never wanted to fight the family. I only wanted to be respected as an adult, as a person." There was a long silence. I thought she might cry. But instead, I heard a light, trembling sigh. "I'll try," she whispered. "I promise." A week later, our family's annual 4th of July barbecue rolled around, an event I'd avoided for years. But this time, the invitation didn't come through the family group chat. It came as a personal call from Mom herself. "Come, Harper," she said gently. "Nothing fancy. Just a small barbecue in the yard." Something in her tone, quiet, human, hopeful, made me smile. This time, I said yes. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house. The sight that greeted me almost made me laugh. There were no banners, no backdrops, no microphones, just a few wooden tables under a string of soft lights draped across the trees, and the comforting smell of grilled meat drifting through the air. For the first time in years, my family's house looked like an actual home, not a stage. My father stood by the grill, sleeves rolled up, tongs in hand. When he saw me, he smiled a real smile, this time, not the polite one he wore for appearances. "Harper," he called out. "You made it? Burger or hot dog?" I laughed, walking closer. "Burger, but go easy on the sauce." He nodded, flipping a patty onto the grill as if nothing complicated had ever stood between us. Mom was setting the table. When she saw me, she handed me a glass of iced tea. "No wine today," she said softly. "I figured everyone should stay clear-headed so we can remember this as a peaceful day." I smiled, taking the glass. "I like that better." And then Lila stepped out from the house, carrying a big bowl of salad. She wore a simple floral dress, her hair tied up in a loose bun, no heavy makeup, no effort to shine. When she saw me, she grinned. "Sit next to me, okay?" she said, pulling out the chair beside her. I nodded and took the seat. The atmosphere felt different, lighter, quieter. No one bragged about degrees or careers. The conversation flowed easily. Food, weather, weekend plans. A few relatives I hadn't seen in years asked about my life, not with sarcasm, but with genuine curiosity. "So, Harper," Uncle Carl said kindly, "what are you up to these days?" Before I could answer, Lila jumped in, her voice bright and proud. "She runs a $5 million company, Uncle Carl, and she's still the most humble person at this table." For a second, the table went silent. Then everyone burst out laughing, not the sharp, mocking laughter of years past, but the warm kind, the kind that fills a space instead of cutting through it. It felt like an invisible knot somewhere between us had finally been undone. Dad lifted his glass of tea. "Well, 5 million, huh? Maybe I should apply for a job at your company." Everyone laughed again, louder this time. I looked around at my father, my mother, my sister, and for the first time, I didn't feel like an outsider looking in. There were no lines dividing us, no roles to play, no silent comparisons. Just family, imperfect, human, and finally, at peace. That night, as fireworks burst across the sky, I quietly stepped out into the backyard. The lake reflected streaks of color, crimson, gold, violet, and the faint scent of smoke lingered in the cool summer air. Lila walked up beside me, holding a light jacket. "It's getting chilly," she said softly. I slipped it over my shoulders and smiled at her. "Thanks. Tonight's been really nice." "Yeah," she murmured, eyes drifting toward the glowing sky. "I think we spent too many years fighting over who was loved more." I didn't reply. She was right. But maybe it was those lost years that made this quiet evening mean so much. A moment later, Mom came out, her arm looped through Dad's. They stood together, looking up at the fireworks. For the first time, I saw them truly at peace, no posturing, no comparisons, no performance. Just two people watching the night sky, their faces washed in soft light. I leaned against the railing, feeling the gentle wind against my skin, and a thought floated through me like a sigh. I don't need them to understand. I just need them to stop laughing. And it's true. Sometimes, what you need to forgive the past isn't an apology or acknowledgement. It's silence. Silence long enough for your heart to finally grow calm. When the last firework faded, Lila tilted her head toward me and whispered, "Hey, do you think I could work at Econest someday?" I looked at her and smiled, a smile of pride, of warmth, of quiet understanding. "When you're ready," I said, "the door's always open." She grinned, her eyes shimmering under the last flicker of light. In that moment, I knew things had truly changed. There were no winners or losers anymore. Only people who had finally learned how to be kind. To each other, and to themselves. If you've ever been made to doubt your worth by your own family, remember this. That pain isn't the end, it's the beginning. Because sometimes, the deepest wounds are where the first light enters, showing you the strength that's always been inside you. You don't need anyone's acceptance to be worthy. And you don't need to prove yourself to anyone but you. Take that pain, use it as fuel. Turn your silence into a voice, and all those years of being underestimated into the power to stand tall. With grace and with freedom. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. If you, too, had to grow up learning to love yourself in a family that didn't know how. Leave a heart below. So, I know you're out there, healing in your own way.